After our talk is over, feel free to grab one of us and we can answer questions for you. And we also have our website and Facebook page. So this evening we are very happy to welcome Mr. Gregg Castro. Across society, the road to building lasting partnerships and collaborations in order to create a better world has been decades in the making. But it has accelerated in the last few years due to the social justice movement, climate calamities, and pandemic aftermath. It has intensely impacted Indigenous communities who hold ancient and effective knowledge of how to interact with the world that gave them the gift of life and their homeland. Tonight, Gregg Castro will lead a group discussion and will explore how these new interactions came to be and where these newborn bonds will take us as we continue to protect cultural resources and heal the earth, as our original instructions directed us all to do. Gregg has worked for more than 3 decades, preserving his own as well as California's indigenous heritage as an activist writer. Among his many ventures, he is culture director for the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, chair of the Society for California Archaeology's Native American Programs Committee, and is advisor to the California Indian Conference and California Indian History Curriculum Coalition. So please join me in a warm welcome for Mr. Gregg Castro.
Fourscore and 7 years ago. This sounds very formal. We have a bunch of people in here. You just announced to me that the most you've ever had. Thank you very much for that high bar I have to meet. And then some friends and elders, and hopefully they'll still be friends at the end of this talk. I am not a speechifier by any means, and if anybody had been to the SCA conference or saw my forum, they would have witnessed that in intense glory that we tend to wing it because we tend to go with our feelings and our guts. That's what's kept us alive for a couple of 100 years, the last part of history here in California, and we tend to trust our guts. I think this is a good group to have guts with, so we'll see how this goes. I have a vague idea and a lot of things that have come up, especially in the last week coming back from the SCA conference, and then today doing some of the things I did in San Francisco before I came here, and it's all about collaboration. Before I continue, I want to start off in a good way, as elders have taught me, culture bearers, and that's with the song. This is a good luck song from the Rumsen people, my mother's people of Monterey Bay. Usually I sing the fog song, but it doesn't seem to need it today. It's a little on the warm side. San Francisco didn't need it either. I don't know how long that song lasts. Usually it only lasts a day or two. I sang it last about 3 weeks ago, and still, rain doesn't count. So I'm going to do this good luck song, and I'm not going to do it for days as our ancestors did. It'll just be a few moments, if you pardon me. Towa towa hiye, hiyeli ama. 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 Towa towa hiye. Yeah. Oh, keep on the microphone, just got an earful. And this is a little strange because I got to stay right here so that the people out in the universe can see me. Usually I kind of wander around. And I do want this to be interactive because, like I said, I don't speechify. I want to talk. That's all I'm comfortable doing. I've succeeded to fool people that I can give speech for over 30 years, and I don't want to ruin that. So hopefully there'll be some things that you want to say to me and in response to what I say to you. I don't have a clear plan because there's so much under that cloud of collaboration. And I say cloud because it's not all, rays and sunshine. And one of the things that comes to mind is what the forum we put together just recently for the SEA conference last week. And it was regarding collaboration. And it was in response to the new regulations that came out about NAGPRA and CalNAGPRA. And just for people in the back who don't know what NAGPRA is the law that came in 1990 that was trying to get the collections that were all across the country to be eventually returned to the Native people. They were supposed to do it within 3 to 5 years. 34 years later, here we are, still working on that issue. CalNAGPRA was the state version that tried to kind of push that along and also included, to a certain extent, non-recognized tribes, of which there are many in California. And it's moved it along like a glacier. So now what's happened is that in response to that, various rules and regulations have been implemented at the state and federal level, especially the state. That seems to be rattling people. And actually was the genesis of the forum we just did, because in response to the new regulations, lots of places like museums and universities who are utilizing the collections for public exhibits, education, and teaching, especially in archaeology, all of a sudden basically shut the door. They welded the vault shut because they're afraid of the consequences, or at least to be publicly shamed, which is part of the regulations, is to talk about the statistics involved. And the whole impetus was you cannot show these things without the permission of the tribe they come from. It seems simplistic, it seems realistic, it seems straightforward, perhaps in today's context, but it's in regards to the long history of archaeology and archaeologists and the collections that have been done over the last 150, close to 200 years, it's a dramatic change, and it caused a big fright in a lot of archaeologists. It was interesting, and I will admit, at the forum last Saturday for the NAPC forum at the SCA conference, we brought together a bunch of people, most of whom did not show up. So instead, we had the current president, Brendan Greenway, was on our panel. Will Madrigal, who partners with me to help conduct the Native American Programs Committee, especially in Southern California, where he's from, and myself. And then Lynn Gamble, retired from UC Berkeley, actually UC Santa Barbara, who was one of the early professors who engaged in NAGPRA consultation in the UC system. And it was interesting that Brendan started off, and I'm good friends with Brendan, but he said in a very panicked voice, it's going to be serious detriment to archaeology. And Will and I admitted, and I said that we kind of snickered. And it has to do with switching positions, perhaps, that we as Native people have such great attachment, and I'll come into that in a moment, to these things in the collections, these artifacts, these items in your collections. And we have had very little say over that in the 150 to 200 years that these collections have been building up. And now all of a sudden, we're getting knocks on the door from lots of people saying, we need to talk to you right away, and we need to work this out. And everything's frozen in time, and classes can't be conducted, exhibits can't be shown, and shrouds are being thrown over exhibit cases so that people can't see them because we don't have that tribal permission. And like I said, I kind of said, most Native people, and I did, snickered because we understand, some of us, the issue. And having been part of the Society for California Archaeology for 30 years, I'm well aware of the issue, and yet I'm a tribal person first. And to have this urgency come to the fore is what we've been asking for a long time, not necessarily under the gun, but we'll take it how we can get it, because now we have to talk. And this is a talk we've been asking for literally decades. And now they're coming, it's like, can we talk right now? Like yesterday would have been better, but right now would be fine. So there is a little bit of that. I think what will help us get past it is that some of us have personal relationships with archaeologists, because the system of archaeology, the profession, the science, the industry, still has embedded within it these barriers for collaboration. And we now have to depend on individual archaeologists to get around those barriers, because it seems that those barriers themselves are insurmountable. I'm not convinced of that, but it's slowly happening. And I think it's like watching paint dry on the wall. In my 30 years, I've seen it. Some of you have been around, a long time, may have seen it, but it's a gradual thing. So you are not going to see it day to day. But I think over the 30 years I've been involved, I've seen a clear difference in how Native people and tribal communities are being approached about archaeology. And it's exciting to see. And like I said, we get our giggles where we can, because it's a very interesting situation. It's almost like the shoe's on the other foot. So, okay, we'll get over our giggling in a moment, and then we will start to engage. And how do we do that? That's the tougher question, actually. It's something we've been trying to do for long before I became involved as a tribal activist. I'm sure I'm not the first Native person to go to an SEA conference. I may have been the first person to come back more than once. I don't know. No statistics are available on that subject, but I think, there were times where I was the only one that went, that would at least identify. I mean, sometimes I see somebody, I'm pretty sure you're Native, but you're not going to tell me, are you? And they wouldn't identify themselves. They're just like checking the thing out, and then wouldn't come back because they probably didn't like what they see, especially in the 90s even. So like I said, there was lots of good people. I collaborated with them. Some of them were the ones who brought me in to the SCA and to archaeology. But the institution still had remnants of the old school. And literally inviting some of my friends, encouraging them to go to the archaeology conference was difficult, because they didn't feel they would have a friendly atmosphere. I said, no, it's not that bad. I've been there a couple of times, I've survived. Come on down. So I did have one friend who finally showed up. Unfortunately, that person went into a paper session, and that person, one of the speakers in that session said, who is an archaeologist who I will not name, at an institution I will not name, holding collection that I will not name, saying, it's mine. I'm not giving it back. And my friend turned around and looked at me and, you wanted me to come and hear that? But I keep telling our tribal people, archaeology in California is mostly about Native culture. The SCAs, it's like 80% of the papers are Native culture. You need to be in the room. You must be in the room. It's uncomfortable, at least at first. And then, you go to the site auction, it's a little bit different. But it's uncomfortable because you're unfamiliar. And that's the work that I tried to do with the Native American Programs Committee when I finally took it over, is to be that welcoming place to come. Because if you walk around the SCA conference, and if you deal with a lot with archaeology, you're going to be inundated with this sense of science, modern science, that views your culture, that you believe is sacred, as an object and a tool and a specimen. Whether that's meant to be or not, that's the impression that people came away with when they encountered archaeology. And that has prevented lots of Native people from coming to the SCA conferences and dealing with archaeologists. When I first started out in the early 90s, and I was doing a little bit of monitoring consulting with firms, especially down at 400 Leggett, which is my dad's culture. And they had a huge project down there to survey all the sites, which there's literally thousands on that base. And then the surrounding area, good old Rob Edwards, like, covered all of that just in a couple of acres on the border between the Fort Hunter Liggett and Los Padres. There are literally hundreds of sites just in that small little strip of area on the border. So it's a culturally rich area. And they had a huge project to catalog all those over a 3 to 4 year period. We interacted a lot with them and we got to know them. That's the way Native people do things. We build relationships. It's not business to us. It can't be business to us. So we can't do business style agreements. We have to be able to trust people. We have to know them and know that we can place trust in them when we share our information. And that's still the barrier all these decades later. It's slowly eroding. And of course, we're infiltrating, right? Because we have some archaeologists that are Native. And they're teaching. And they're bringing up other archaeologists. So pretty soon we're going to take over. It's inevitable. She mentioned I was a facilitator for the California Indian Conference. That's got a 35-year history, and it started out by academics talking about Indians with almost virtually no Native presence at all. 10 years later, they started to see some Natives come in because, again, we heard they were talking about us. The last probably 15 years of the conference has been basically Native run, Native led. And the preponderance of the papers and presentations are Native now. So that's your future, archaeology and the SCA. We're just going to take that over too. I'll probably be gone by then, but who knows? I'll still be in the hospitality suite that NAPC runs. I'll stay there. And actually, that's part of it because the hospitality suite is open to everybody at the SCA. We kind of want people to mingle. We want people to get together. Like I said, our work is about relationships. This is not business. This is social, emotional. It's spiritual. These are our relatives, not objects. Even the baskets are relatives. That's what we're taught. That's what we're brought up as, that we are part of a world that's alive, and everything in it is alive. And those relatives that have been taken away and put into cabinets, into boxes, into storage, they're our relatives and they're alive and they're captured. That's our actual belief, which probably drives some of the reactions that some of our people give when they encounter archaeologists. So understanding that, how we feel about it, is important in order to build that relationship. And I have experienced that a number of times over the years where the initial collaboration on a project is basically sitting down and talking. And the Native people need to have some assurance that you're going to honor and respect our belief system. You don't have to believe it. But we don't want you to denigrate it, which has happened in the past. We don't want you to disrespect it or diminish it or erase it. You just don't have to believe it. But in that context, as you would with anybody else, I think, any other human being, you have some element of respect for them as people. And bringing that into the relationship is absolutely crucial. And we're not going to get anywhere unless that happens. Now, that can happen in lots of different ways with lots of different people. I'm trying to get more people to the SCA conference, and it's working. We now had a major contingent, probably the most we've ever had in the history of the SCA conference. I've been going for 30 years, and I've never seen that many Native people. And they all identified. There might have been a few sneaking around too, but on top of that, there was probably 50 Native people. And some of them were not just rank and file, they were leaders in their communities. A couple of tribal chairs, a lot of TIPOs, tribal historic preservation officers, who deal directly with archaeologists and cultural resource management. And they were doing panels there. And you're going to see more of that in the future. So SCA is going to change and archaeology is going to change, even if they don't want to. But hopefully they'll want to, because I think they're going to get something out of it. They're going to get a level of understanding and expertise that they've never gotten before. I mean, it's as simple as in a class I taught for Mark Allen down at Cal Poly a couple of years ago. I asked the question, you have this item that you find on the site, and it's one of those items like it doesn't match any of the criteria for the standard flints or points or jewelry or anything else. It's something different. So what do? And for the very first time, somebody actually held up their hand and said, well, I'd go find the people that made it and ask them. That was actually the first time in years of lecturing that somebody said that. They had all kinds of other things. Let's go ask professors. Let's go look it up in catalogs. The fact that somebody said, well, why don't we just ask the people that it belonged to was a first. And so that shows that things are slowly changing in a good way. And I think it's the younger generation that's coming up. No offense to the people in my age range, sorry, but I think they're just coming up with a different, as a group, they're coming up with a different sense of things. And it's matching our young people who are coming up probably in ways culturally that we did not. I mean, for certain tribal communities like mine, that information was taken away or deeply suppressed because it was dangerous. My father was born in 1924, was raised by grandparents that were born in the 19th century when it was dangerous to be native. And so they naturally didn't tell people. And he grew up naturally not telling people. And he passed that along, the idea of be proud of who you are, but don't tell anybody. It was just natural. I grew up in east side of San Jose, heavily Hispanic, with a Hispanic name. My parents spoke Spanish, both of them. And the assumption for the community was we're Hispanic. And my parents were fine with that. So I literally grew up with people from kindergarten to 12 that did not know I was native. Only a handful. It's just something that didn't come up in the conversation. We're playing basketball, we're shooting slingshots, we're eating hot chocolate, whatever it is, it's like it never came up, so we never said anything. My children came in when I was starting to learn our traditions and bringing back ceremony. My grandchildren have not had a moment of their life where they haven't heard language. I sung to them when they were born. That's huge. And we're seeing that all across California in various ways. There's certainly some areas of California where it continued. Many people didn't know that, but it continued outside the eye of the public. Because again, it was dangerous, so you just keep it yourself. And of course, cultural preparation is a real thing when people come and take our things. I mean, I've been out to Los Padres National Forest and see people walking away with the big 42-gallon garbage bags full of sage, indiscriminately just ripping it out of the ground so they could go sell it or give it away as gifts. So those kinds of things are little pinpricks for us that indicate that we need to think about how much things have changed or not, and always put us on alert, so to speak, always put us on high status and always checking, always looking around. And I do that today, even at the SCA, and I've been going for 30 years, but there's always that. And that came up a little bit in our forum when we were talking about NAGPRA, CalNAGPRA, that little bit of anxiety about what's going to happen to archaeology. So it was an interesting flip for me. Some of the other work I've been doing, not involving archaeologists, but involving collections, is getting to be interesting. And in some cases, like at San Francisco State University, they formed a new NAGPRA committee with a new NAGPRA program. This is the third go around. The other two kind of like faltered and fizzled out. These are all really, none of them are archaeologists. So it's no longer within that realm and no longer has that control. And in fact, for some institutions, they're actually totally flipped. It's like, I don't want to pay for this anymore. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I want this out of here now. So now there's this urgency again, based on their need, to get the collection back to the people. And of course, that can cause other additional problems in the chaos. But it's interesting, again, the shoe's on the other foot, where the urgency is now, instead of keeping them, is to give them back and get them out. So we're sort of like, yay, but there's always issues. There's always who it really belongs to, whether the documentation is adequate to determine who is really responsible for those things. That's always a question in what we do. The fact that most tribal communities do not exist in a way that existed in pre-contact time. Almost virtually every community was affected. If you look at the numbers, and that statistics are always a fun game that you argue about in bars, but the statistics tend to agree that within 111 years, from 1769 when Portola first showed up and got lost walking past Monterey that he was looking for, to the time of the 1880 census, approximately, 90% of our native people were gone. And the 10% left were basically in fear for their lives. And that's the atmosphere my great-grandparents who raised my dad grew up in, that they then passed on to him. Those don't go away just willy-nilly, just because you wish them. It takes a lot of hard work, and we're still in the middle of that hard work when all of a sudden we're being put upon to share our knowledge. Because again, there's a panic, right? When climate change was being talked about years ago, our elders were saying that 75 years ago. The world is changing. The world is becoming sick. We need to help it stay healthy, and we weren't listened to. Now it's really sick, and regular society is being affected, and to the point where sadly our newcomers to California and their towns are being burned up. Now all of a sudden they're coming to us. Like, we need your help. We need your knowledge. And we need it now. So that's the setting for it. It sounds simple. It's fraught with emotion for us. But we're going to do that. And here's the reason. Our teachings, our cultural and spiritual teachings tells us we're put in a place for a reason. And we're literally made from that place. My father's people, Salinan people, down in Los Padres National Forest, the stories tell us that we came into the world at the base of Statio is what we call it. Santa Lucia Peak is its new term. It has another term that I won't use. And it's the highest mountain in the range, and that's what was left after the flood. That covered the earth from which the first people, Eagle, and the others, reformed the world. And after the world was reformed and made to how we see it now, we were brought into the world. 2-footers, my elder used to say. And we were taught, here's this gift, this wonderful world, and all you have to do is take care of it, right? Do some chores. Because it's great as it is. We formed it for you, and now just carry on. And we did that for literally tens of thousands of years. And it's because we think we were made of the world. The stories of my father at the base of Statio say we were made from elderberry. What we use for lots of things, medicine, food, and clapper sticks that we sing at ceremony. So we're not made on the land, we're made of the land. The land is of us, and we carry it wherever we go. Even if I'm not carrying the clapper stick, I'm still carrying my homeland with me. There's that intimate, personal, spiritual attachment to those places and to everything on them. And we believe everything is alive. And all we have to do is take care of it. So our basic understanding is we take care of the homeland, we take care of all the living things on it, even those that have come more recently. And so that's what propels us to work within society now in the work that we're doing with like ecological restoration, cultural burnings to suppress wildfires, all those things, while we're juggling our trauma still. We're still dealing with that. We never had that intense therapy because we were prevented from doing ceremony for many, many years. The Religious Freedom Act for Native people only happened in 1978, not 1778 or 1878, 1978. Living memory for many of us. People think of those as discrete, separate things. We do not. We can't as Native people. Those are all together for us. We view the world as an integrated network, to use a modern term. And we don't separate those things. And our people, and as practitioners, don't separate those things. Basket weavers know a vast amount of information amongst a vast amount of subjects. They have to in order to be able to understand what it takes to make a basket, how to acquire the materials in a proper way. It has to be done in a good way with indigenous science. We're just now starting a project with my Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, with the Exploratorium and the California Academy of Sciences, where we're going to look into how what we assume is climate change, but we don't know. We don't want to prejudge. It's probably climate change. But exactly how it is affecting the plants that they're gathering, that they depend on for food, for tools, and for their livelihood in many cases. And as one elder told me, they're sick. We don't know why. Our indigenous knowledge is not covering it. Indigenous knowledge that's usually passed on tells us how to adapt across cycles, seasonal cycles, yearly cycles, decade cycles, even longer. Those are all things within the indigenous knowledge realm that have been passed along. What's happening now is different. And that indigenous knowledge we have is not working the same way. So perhaps, as an elder once told me, those newcomers, they're pretty smart. They'll catch up eventually. And now we're going to see if that's what's going to happen. We're going to try to employ modern science, Western science, with indigenous science to see if these plants can tell us what's happening. And that's what as Native people, we always do. We ask the plants. If you sit there and listen, they will tell you what's going on. And that's what we don't do too much in this world, is sit down and listen, or talking, like me right now. So bringing all these elements together is very interesting. Where we were siloed before, there would be certain tribal people that only deal with archaeologists, and they're over there. And then there's certain people over here that do plant stuff, and they're dealing with biologists over here. And there's certain people that deal with funding, and they're dealing with the government over here. But that's not by nature of what we do. We are usually brought up in all these sciences and have some semblance of knowledge in all of these sciences. So we contribute because we don't do things alone. We don't do them in silo. I mean, when we walk out into the outer world, we don't do things alone. We don't do them in silo. We build relationships with people that will help us accomplish our goals, that we hope will benefit you as well. As archaeologists, if you want to know about us, instead of getting obsidian hydration rates and putting them on a spreadsheet, which is fine for those that do that sort of thing, you might also talk to us and see what comes up with your investigations. So that integration of knowledge, which is what is the foundation of Native life, and how we've been able to sustain ourselves quite well over 10 to 15,000 years, depending on whose book you read. I'm actually edging over to the 130,000 down there in San Diego, but that's just my personal bias. As my elder said, you guys will all catch up eventually. When I started out, actually, it was about 8,000 years. And if you went to 10, 5 digits, oh my God, you're a radical, aren't you? And of course now, it's pretty much a given that's like we're at 13 to 15,000 years and going back further. Your marine archaeologist that's going to talk next month, that's interesting because most people believe the really old stuff is out there. Yeah. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that works as they apply more modern science to that and see if they can find out more. I'm kind of yacked out for the moment, so questions? You're asleep? I don't hear any snoring, so I know there's some students out there. You better ask a question, otherwise you're going to get it. I'm sure I can find something else to yak about. If nobody has a question, yes.
Thank you so much for your talk, Greg. And my family has been in Alabama, the land of the Muskogee and the Porch and others for 4 generations. And I'm just wondering if you, I don't know, what the crossover is between the people who were brought over from the Trail of Tears and the people who stayed as remnants, if y'all work together, because so much of what you're saying also, of course, applies to that area, which also had a huge number of indigenous people before the settlers.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, the Trail of Tears happened all over the country. There's one that's well known, but it happened all over. I think there's at least 3 in California. At least 3. Some would say more in terms of a mass movement. I don't know if this quite answers it, but what I've had to do the last couple of years working with the Ramaytush Ohlone community, which is the San Francisco Peninsula from Alcatraz down to about Mountain View, Stevens Creek area. Within that area, especially in San Francisco, there's a huge population of relocated Native people that came in the mid-20th century when the government was trying to move people off the reservations and disavow their responsibility to Native people that way by emptying the reservations and then closing them down. That was the goal. It didn't work, as many government plans do not work. And what happened was those people came here because they didn't have their homeland and their people. They found each other. Again, it's about relationships. And they clung to each other. A lot of those relationships are fraught with the people that have been relocated, maybe not necessarily through their own fault or understanding, and the relationship back to the people on the res. But I know that most of the people I've talked to that live back in their homelands, they also know those are still those people. And there's something missing in, for lack of a better word, the matrix, the social matrix of a people when people have been forcibly moved. And although it wasn't quite by the point of a gun as it was in earlier times, but most of the people that I've talked to that have left the reservations, left their homelands willingly in the mid-20th century did so because they were so impoverished, they didn't think they'd be able to survive there. So to me, that's not much different. And when you have that forceful wrenching away from your homeland, it's literally like tearing a limb off. And I can see that in the people I work with in San Francisco. Some of now 2 or 3 generations away from their homeland. There's some young people that have never been back to their homeland, but they've been able to learn their traditions, some of their customs, some of their songs. They still have that spiritual attachment. My elder that taught me, Dr. Del Dave Wilson, he talked about, and I can't remember the Auti words for it, but he talked about people were born with 2 umbilical cords, right? The one we know about, right? Tamal. That sustains us while we're within her and for a short time afterwards. He says we're also born with a spiritual umbilical cord that goes into the ground, into Mother Earth. And we all have that. And it continues. We have it as long as we're on this earth. Not only binds us to the earth, it binds us to each other because everybody's umbilical cords go into the same place. And I certainly believe that with Native people that have been removed from their place, they don't forget. Also, as Dr. Babe said, we're all born with that seed of who we really are. And no matter what happens, we don't totally forget it. We can't. It's built into our very DNA. And if we don't remember, that's the imbalance that our Native elders talk about, right? Because we think that the world was created and formed, and in its early days for many thousands of years was in balance. We helped maintain that balance with the cultural practices we did for tending the land. And now it's imbalance, and people are the same way. If you separate them from the land, any land, right? In San Francisco, in the Mission District, it's asphalt, concrete, pavement. A lot of them don't barely get over to the Golden Gate Park that's only a few miles away and touch real earth. And we think there's a spiritual detriment when you don't touch the earth, when you don't touch what's real. Those that are able to do it have been able to maintain their sanity, for lack of a better word, and have stayed grounded and balanced. But that's even in the face of a lot of forces that are against that. It's only been in the last few years that I've seen a dramatic change, I would call it, in the way the approach to Native people. And it had a combination of the social justice movement, Black Lives Matter, climate change, and the lockdown itself. The lockdown to me was the last point. I think all of those things need to happen at the same time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that same result. But with all those things happening and then the lockdown, people had to go home. A lot of people had to go home, and they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs, and eventually they got to thinking. Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, they actually thought, right? And some were thinking, like, what is this world about? What is my place in it, right? We didn't take long for people to talk about quiet quitting, right? And what was the basis of that? What I was hearing was like they understood that the world, that the social construct they worked within was not serving their needs. They were serving the needs of the construct of the machine. So their life was empty, right? The reason I believe Native people have been able to sustain themselves for the last 250 years in California is because they had that. No matter what happened to them, they still had that seed that was alive within it. They could reach out to culture in whatever form or fashion and survive. Some didn't. Physically didn't, but also culturally and socially and spiritually they didn't survive. Some were so decimated that their knowledge was taken away entirely. But some are coming back. And some are becoming involved in the culture. And it's a new growth in the beginning. And some of us call it an uprising. Because they're very strong about it. And they're also learning, along with our allies, that the things they were taught in school were not true. A few years back, I met a professor at CSU San Bernardino who wrote a book about the mission system, the true story of the mission system. But the later days, history of the mission system in the 20th century, the myth that generated, everybody thinks came from the Catholic Church about antediluvian, romanticized missions. They came, built these missions, they all were having siestas, and the Indians just disappeared. That was actually created by real estate interests in the early 20th century when LA was looking for people to go there. I think they didn't want them there anymore. They were kind of overflowing, but they brought them there because they didn't want people to know what was under the ground of the houses that were being built for them. So losing touch of reality is something we've all experienced in a sense. And I think during that time of the lockdown, people had more than a few moments to like sit back. It's like, what the heck just happened? What's going on? And I experienced that directly because for about a month, I was working because I worked for AT&T at the time, and we didn't get a day off. In fact, we had to go overtime because we were putting in all the fiber optic lines so that you could all Zoom. I literally worked across the street from the headquarters of Zoom. And they knew what was going to happen. Literally the day of the lockdown, we had a stack of orders saying, this normally takes you 3 weeks, you have 3 days because we need this bad. But about a month later, all of a sudden, we, through my associations in Indian country, whether it's ARO or SCA or other venues, we started getting calls like, can you come and talk to us? I was doing online presentations. By June, I was probably doing 3 or 4 a week. After I worked, by the way. Because I was still working, and then I come home and I just get right on the computer and do all these. And it was obvious that people were asking different kinds of questions, more intense questions. And there was an emotional context behind them that I had not seen before. It wasn't just idle intellectual curiosity. They were searching for truth, or the version of truth that they needed as part of their own healing. And it's continued since then, actually. For 2 years that went on. And I still get a lot of them. So I think we had a dramatic moment here as a planet, even though people kind of like gone back to the old ways, right? We were talking about that just a little while ago, that at the SCA conference. We were all pretending there was no COVID, and then on the way back, we got an alert saying there was people at the conference that had COVID. You better go check yourself. We're still there. We can only sustain ourselves at that high level, I think, for a certain amount of time. But it's a dramatic change that I hadn't seen before. And I think it's starting with Native people. Standing Rock had something to do with it as well. But that it's starting to wake people up. So I'm proud to be woke, personally. Yes.
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
I was hoping you could possibly share some perspective on ways we can reduce the stigma between like integrating and sharing knowledge with each other. Because that seems like a very important thing just as a whole in life in general.
Actually, that's part of our project I mentioned earlier with the California Academy and Exploratorium and ARO. And it started, shameless plug, there's going to be a Native festival at the Exploratorium, free to the public, April 27th, Saturday. Everybody show up. Where we're bringing culture bearers, the premier culture bearers of Northern California. There's going to be 12 of them, at least. And they're going to be demonstrating for free. You can walk up to them, talk. If you can find a spot at Julia Parker's table, she'll show you how to weave. She's probably the premier basket weaver of the last century in California. And she's still with us at 95. And she's still weaving. And I think that in that conversation we had last year, our inaugural fest, that's why I was talking to the gatherers. They're telling me these things are seen wrong with the plants. And it was interesting because some didn't want to talk about it. Because they were sort of embarrassed because they're now being told, but you are the indigenous knowledge holders. And they didn't know what was going on. They could say what, but not why. And that was sort of embarrassing. They didn't want to talk about it. Well, I was like, no, you need to talk about it. But how do you do that? This is a case where I think my experience with, archaeology and other sciences can be helpful because in those settings, we're usually asked during or after the fact, right? A project is created, it's formed and put together. And then also, oh, by the way, we got to go talk to some Navy people as consultants, right? This was built from the ground up for the Native scientists to be on a par with the Western sciences. In fact, the way we're planning it is that the very first day that these two groups are going to meet, the scientists are going to sit there. I'm going to feed them coffee and muffins and stuff their face so that they'll shut up and listen. Because a lot of times, I mean, even well-meaning, I've been in these meetings where they get so excited, some indigenous elder says something really cool, and they're like, oh, please, I got to ask. I don't want no interruptions. You need to sit and listen. This was inspired by Anthony Madrigal, who used to be the attorney for the Agua Caliente. He was also the attorney for the Native American Heritage Commission years ago when I met him. He left and did their EPA document. And it was, that's a pretty major tribe, well-funded tribe. They have a massive cultural resources department that does some really groundbreaking work. And they developed this EPA plan. And at the end of it, they did the credit thing, right? EPA funded, government funded, Agua Caliente funded. And then here's the people that worked on it. The very first page of the consultants, indigenous scientists, and listed all the elders that worked on the project. And then they threw in some other scientists with PhDs or MAs or whatever. But that was like the first time it was so starkly done. I mean, we speak about it, but he put it up on the document. These are our scientists. We have conferred on them the highest level of acknowledgement of their knowledge. There are PhDs. And that really struck me because I've been in lots of situations that I couldn't quite articulate until I saw that we in some ways, even unintentionally, are diminished. We have folkloric information, right? Not science, it's folkloric information. That automatically diminishes us. No, we have science. And that's what's part of this project. And that's what has to be promoted is that, and it's in some of the documents that the state is propelling consultation with. It's like you need to consider the information and you need to consider it at the same level as our science. And that's just barely in the process. And we're going to use that in our project, hopefully, to get across that. These are people that have done field work that you couldn't even imagine. So you need to listen to what they say because they actually know more than you in a lot of ways. And then you can go do your science thing and play with beakers or whatever you're gonna do. Yeah, Julie.
Would you say something about today's newspaper had the story about the shell mound property at Oakland and and how long this process has been and what it's been about?
Yeah, my good friend, relative, Karina Gold, finally when we came in and we're active in the Ohlone community about the same time. And if you've heard her speak, I mean, I'm in awe of her. And she speaks with such a command of knowledge and purpose. And I tease her all the time. It's like, I knew you back when, you know. And she was just relentless about it. The Brickley Shell Mound. And I read the article, at least the one I saw, was talking about in the way that journalists try to do is create equality. And we're like, but it's not balanced. We want balance, right? So they mentioned something about the archaeological work that was done on the site, and some people are claiming, well, it's not actually under that pavement, right? And it's much more complex than that. That village site was probably massive, and it spanned a much larger area than the archaeological site did when they first investigated it. And that was the point that we were making. And that idea of archaeological sites is kind of foreign to us. It's a village place. And so, I mean, the odds were so much against them, you know, because property rights is the religion of America. Property, that's my opinion. Property rights are, you get to own stuff, which is totally alien to us. You can't own your mother. Right? Go talk to, if your mother's still with you, go say that, hey, Mom, I owe you, but don't do it while she's in the kitchen so that she doesn't have a frying pan or a rolling pin to grab. But that's literally how we feel about it. We can't own that. But we're put in that context where we have to work within that system. And so, okay, we often do that in survival mode. We've learned the system. So here Karina created one of the first land trusts, native land trusts, and got the largest donation for that land trust in the nation that we know of to buy their sacred land, their sacred shell mound back. So we were like, but it got the job done. You know, it's bittersweet, but whatever it takes to take care of our mother, that's what we'll do. And she's done this great job. It's not quite over yet. They could still use some money. The donation was 20 million. I don't have access to their bank account, but I know they need more than that to complete the deal. And then once they get the land back, it's going to take several million at least, because I saw their plan for that site. It's going to take several million to rehabilitate it into the vision that they have. So the fight's not over, but there's battles to be fought, but the war is kind of winding down, at least for that one site.
I was just thinking about, for people who are just starting in this, how long these struggles take and you have to hang in. And I was really surprised when I read this morning's paper.
Yeah.
It's been, 30 years of struggle for this?
Over 25 at the very least, I think, is when they first started to talk about developing that site. I mean, the site was known about for a long, long time. When they first started talking about developing it, that was over a quarter of a century ago. So yeah, and for us, it's not a matter of time. It's like, it's the right thing to do. I mean, she was training her grandkids, like, if you have to keep doing it, here's what you got to do. They'll just keep at it. We're not going away. And one of our elders from Southern California taught me, it's like, it was in the same community that talked about the newcomers finally catching on eventually. But they were also saying, we're going to be here whether they stay or not. They come, they go. They may not take their trash when they leave, but we'll still be here, and we're going to take care of the earth and make it right again. And we don't care how long it is, because we don't think in terms of time. We think of the right thing to do. That was the right thing to do, to protect that site. They always say, well, it's just, one of the excuses that I heard is like, well, it's almost all gone anyway, so what would it matter now?
Exactly.
Excuse me? You want to complete the job of extinction and eradication? No, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I look up to she's my hero. Long, hard fight and succeeded. I'm kind of a curmudgeon, is that the right word? I thought, I didn't think I would see it in my lifetime. You know, maybe my grandkids would make friends with her grandkids and they would get it done and they would help. But, you know, the fact that they did it is pretty amazing. You don't win that with those many of the battles. Yes?
Greetings from the floor. I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit about partnerships and how to create more real and trusted partnerships. And my understanding is that from the start, so many protocols, indigenous protocols of indigenous science are broken even before we even open our mouths. And I was wondering if you could help us understand some of the protocols that we should be respecting within doing partnership development, whether it be just in the fundraising or before the idea even comes to surface. What are some of the indigenous science protocols that Western science could learn a lot from?
Oh. Yes, you wound up with a very pointed question. I liked your question up to that point. Now it's like very technical. Well, I think it started out like I said, is validating our science, our version of science, is equal to, different but equal to Western science. You know, and some of it is kind of proven. Here, I'm working with Calamity, and I was teasing one of the people at the planetarium. I just got to see one of the shows called Spark. We talked about the nature of how the universe, where it came from, black hole at the beginning of time, blew up, and here we are. It happened a little more detailed than that, but that was the essence to me. And some of the things they're talking about now. I was just talking to a young person today. Lowell Bean just passed away not too long ago, very well-known ethnographer, archaeologist. And I remember he kind of bridged that gap of Western science and the philosophy that you have to be a detached, uninvolved observer, right? You have to be distant. You have to maintain, your unbiased opinion by being way over here, right? And all our elders laugh at that stuff. Like, you can't do that and really know what you're doing, right? You can't, no matter how much you analyze under a microscope a point, you're not going to know those people. You're going to know about points. You're not going to know about those people. So it's a very narrow viewpoint. And I was joking with somebody the other day. It's like they're actually coming over to our side, right? Because if you look at quantum mechanics, right, one of the principles is the minute you look at something, you change it. Aha! Our elders were right all along, right? So the way they observe the world is different, but equally valid. And that acknowledgement, which I'm going to drag out of these scientists that I'm bringing into this project, either way, so they're not going to stay in the room. I'm kind of setting out the rules, like this is the premise of the entire project. If this isn't comfortable for you, well then go to Disneyland or Pier 39. Don't come visit us. So that's the premises going in. The way you said protocols, that's an interesting way of putting it. The first thing I'd say is whatever you're doing, including indigenous science projects, is sit down and have a meal. I'm serious. My friend Janet Eisens, who was the one who brought me in the SCA years ago, she was the one who did the project at 400 Leggett. She told me when she first moved to California, she was raised in Florida, got her degree in Colorado, and then came to San Diego area with the belief that everybody else had going through K through 12 that all the Indians were gone. And eventually found out in San Diego there's several Indians still there. And then shortly after that, she got a job with the Forest Service up north near the border, Yurok and Taloa areas, and found out really quickly there's a bunch up there and they're not silent. They're pretty vocal. And here comes this, somebody from Florida has no clue what they're doing, and they had to teach her the ropes, and they ran her through the gauntlet and the whole thing. But she passed those tests that showed she could be trustworthy, that she was open to listening. Listening is the big thing. That's what our elders tell us. When you're coming up, shut up and listen. They say it all in different kinds of ways, but that's the essence of it. Shut up and listen, because you don't know everything. And you're standing in front of elders who know more than you. Shut up and listen. You can ask questions. And my elder, and I called him elder, and he got mad at it because he didn't want to be called elder. And now I'm at near his age, and I don't know what he's talking about because I feel like I'm still learning. And I go to elders and I'm shutting up, right? These gatherers that are coming for this project, a lot of them are older than me, and I'm going to shut up and listen too. So listening is an important part of it. And what she did is when she was invited to her first social function, right, away from work, they just casually go, they're at the end of the work day or end of the work week. And, what are you guys going to do? Well, I'm going to the beach. Oh, we're going to have a gathering. Hey, Janet, why don't you come on down? That's it. They walk out the door. She wasn't even sure where it was going to be at. She figured it out. It was going to be at Sumac, which is now a state park. They had a reproduced village there. So she shows up and she only knows a few people and they're all doing stuff. They're busy. So she's like, I don't know what to do. So she did something that worked perfectly for her. She went into the kitchen and started washing her pans because they were cooking. And, she did it on her own, not knowing there was any consequences, but the elders were all looking. And then later on, when they started serving, she was getting bowls and taking them out to elders who couldn't make it to the food line. And so gradually, they learned to trust her. Lowell Bean had a similar story, the way I understood it. When he went down to Cahuilla land at the first, they wouldn't even talk to him at first. And he was a grad student, I think, at the time, if I remember the story correctly. And he had a certain set of questions that his professor said, you've got to go find this stuff out. We want you to go in the barn and clean that stall. They put him in the barn and he was working. But what happened and he had to go because he was getting paid. I think he was on a summer project. So he was getting paid. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the barn. I don't know what that's going to do for my professor, but that's what I got to do. But a couple of days later, if I remember the story correctly, the elders went out to the barn and were sitting around and talking in his presence. And I think, I wouldn't call it a clear test, but it was like, they're seeing how he's going to react. I've seen that myself, where we're putting information out there and then we're watching. It's like, what is your reaction? If you're like rolling your eyes, like, okay, this project ain't flying. But if you engage, or at least take it in with interest on your face, our elders are infamously good at face reading. And you express interest in some way and you're asking questions, engaging questions, not silly questions. Or something that indicates you're bored or like, what am I doing here? But you're open. That's what our young people are taught when they're coming up. Open yourselves up because we're going to pour information into you. And so I think that's the basis of everything we do going forward. We have to know each other personally before I'm going to engage you with this intimate personal information. Right? You can't just walk in the room and expect me to hand you my bank account number. That's not going to happen. You can't expect me to just hand over intimate personal information about my family. Some of it tragic. That's not going to happen either. Because it's still emotionally alive for us. We don't have the same concept of time or our relatives. Years ago, one of the first things that I did early on when I was on my Salinan Tribal Council of my father's people is, I think I was only there 2 years and we were already doing a reburial. And the quick story is that it was not under construction or anything like that. It was a natural phenomenon that happened in the lower part of the Salinas River where there was a washout of a bank. And buried deeply on the bank, but it was a huge washout. So huge chunk of the bank fell out, and what was sticking out was the remains of a young girl. So we went through the coroner and the commission process, whatever. We got them back, and I remember seeing them for the first time. The remains, this little sister, and that's how we thought of it. And there was women were crying. We were all teary eyed, and we had this emotional tug. This is a sister coming back home. That's how we feel about it. You don't have to feel about it, but you have to understand that's how we felt about it, and that's going to guide everything we do. And if you understand that, then you'll know why we do the things we do, say the things we say, and act the way we do. And to me, that's the fundamental. I mean, the rest, it would take days and days, which we don't have, and I don't know when we're cutting off. But... Were we done?
Want to wrap up then.
Okay. Yes, and I want to get this one question. You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
You partially just answered my question, but I was going to ask if you could elaborate some more on how, like, what are some of the ways that indigenous sciences can be integrated into modern technology, and also like indigenous culture and spirituality into group consciousness of society, in ways that'll help us change for the better, to, help heal Mother Earth, and what can we do as individuals to help?
I'm going to divide that up a little bit, because the spirituality part, that's not something for anybody else. It's individualized tribe, because there is no such thing, for instance, as Indian spirituality.
Yeah.
I mean, we use those terms, but it's unique to every group. And their culture and the ways they do things are unique to every group. But I think some ways of looking at the world as alive, to me, that's the most important part. If you look at the world as alive, rather than as a tool, object you can manipulate, which is what led us to this problem. You could just manipulate things, and then later on, you can manipulate the manipulation to make it better, or to fix what you got wrong. And that's not happening very well, and that's why they're coming to us, asking for our indigenous knowledge. So just looking at the world as alive, I think, is a crucial part of it, and not separate from it. It's connected to you. It's going to affect you. You're not above it. In fact, our stories talk about we're the last beings to come into the world. We're the two-footers, we're the kids. If you've ever been in a family where you're the youngest, and I was the youngest of two brothers, my parents, by the time I came along, had the parent thing going pretty well. I had a house to live in, a yard to play in, two annoying older brothers to harass me, but also take care of me, make sure I didn't get beat up, because only they could do that. So that's the family system that we're in the world. And all we do is a few chores, right? I just got to, pick up trash and mow the lawn and pick it up after the dog, and life is good. That's how we were brought into the world. And having that understanding of responsibility, because in the linguistics I know of, there's not that many words for I, many words for we, us. We're in this together, and we have a responsibility, not a right, a responsibility, a sacred obligation to take care of the world because it took care of us. And that's kind of the essence of it, right?
Thanks for packing the house.
Was that more than 10 minutes?
To have all of you here, it seems like how many people are students in this one? Yeah. Thank you for coming. And okay, I'm just gonna stop the recording real quick here.